Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. Good to see you all. Day 6. So, we're well on our way in this 31-day challenge. Hope you're all, enjoying yourselves and opening up to the intensity of this technique. So today what I wanted to talk about and what we're going to explore is, again, the exhale. So the exhale in Sanskrit is rechaka, and finally now this bottom retention. The bottom retention is called baya kumbhaka. I'm certain that you've discovered for yourself that it's this bottom retention that proves to be the most difficult. And that's for like a very obvious reason. You haven't inhaled in a while. So the CO2 levels in your body are way beyond normal, and that creates a lot of distress for the mind and the tissues. Before we get into the nuances of how we're going to exhale, we're going to expand upon that a little more and what to do when we're holding our breath with nothing in our lungs. I just wanted to highlight, again, this chariot metaphor and the fact that this is a super physical process. And so that might contradict your concepts of meditation as being a mental process. And that was sort of the whole point, and is the whole point of the chariot as a metaphor for yoga. The process, life is a physical experience, and the evidence of our relationship to consciousness, the evidence of our capacity to intend our intellect out into the world and do what is best and do what is right. The Sanskrit term for making the more difficult choice, the better choice, is called shreya. There's no English equivalent, but it's a really beautiful word. Sort of tangent, but you wake up in the morning, you usually have coffee, you're trying to drink more water, something like this. You are compelled to do what you naturally or sort of through habit do, even if it's not necessarily best for you. But there's this small voice, this conscience inside that says, take the other path, take the more difficult path. That voice is compelling you to experience shreya, to experience the better choice. And the idea is, if we are to live a life built off of shreya, built off of better choices, we must control our bodies. If you don't control your body, if you can't control what you're eating, if you can't control what you're sort of observing, if you can't control what you're listening to, if you can't control when you wake up, if you can't control your posture, then there's no proof. There's no proof that you have any relationship to your intellect or any relationship to your consciousness. So for this reason, yogic meditation, unlike most lineages, really emphasizes building a strong foundation within the flesh, hence the strong posture, hence the postures themselves, the yoga poses, and hence these breathing strategies. So, I'd just like you to appreciate the fact that it is physical. You're trying to take command of the chariot. Alrighty, so with that, some signs, some of you have been sort of like sharing with me your experience with the technique at this point. Sweating is a good thing. Sweating is the first sort of mark that you're well along the path of Kumbhaka. The second sign of success is actually trembling. And so what that means is you're holding your breath with such intensity for such long periods of time that your nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system, so your fight or flight response is sort of signaling the alarm, and the body starts to quiver. That, alongside the decrease in oxygen in the flesh, creates this trembling experience. And the yogis always associated trembling, whether it was because of retaining the breath or exhaustion within physical postures like yoga poses, they always associated that trembling, which we might associate with danger or fatigue, with sort of the absorption of prana, that they had so much energy inside them that their body started to vibrate. And so again, there's this reframing where the yogic mind takes the negative and flips it on its head and recognizes it as positive. And this is really a derivative of their faith. All things are good. So sweating, then trembling, and I don't think we're there yet, but then the final phase is levitation, right? Levitation. But that's sort of this mind-body split, that you're so engrossed in the intensity of the exercise that your intellect just goes silent. It surrenders to the process. Endurance athletes have this a lot, experience this sort of surrender moment. The body sort of operates through the game all by itself, and they're left to be the observer. Back to that chariot metaphor, they are left to be the rider in the chariot. The charioteer is sort of, the intellect is taking the reins and performing the technique, and the body and the senses are sort of just moving along the exercises. And so if you ever experience that, if you start to sweat, or if you feel like you're about to break a sweat, keep going. That's a good sign. And if you start to tremble under the weight of that sense of suffocation, that is also a good sign. And that just means levitation, or this mind-body split is only, so far away, which is a cool experience. And so it's all deeply physical. Our control over our physical bodies is evidence that we have a strong relationship with our intellect and our consciousness. And that means more than likely we are able to make the better choice, which is called Shreya, S-H-R-E-Y-A. Cool, so what are we gonna do today? Our inhales are gonna be normal, right? So we're just gonna count for our baseline, whatever that is, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then our top retention, our top Kumbhaka, Antar Kumbhaka, A-N-T-A-R-A, is also normal. You're just holding your breath. You can push the belly out a little bit if you enjoyed that, but it's just gonna be for your baseline as well. So now for the exhale. And what we worked on yesterday with the exhale was you want to stay tall during your exhale. So you have to sort of provoke that posture and really work to pull the belly in while you're exhaling in this sort of like unnatural way. So we're going to continue with that, but we're going to lace over a concept. The inhale, if you remember, was associated with this idea of a descent of consciousness from heaven. If you want to think about little babies taking their first breath into the world, this is sort of the inspiration behind this philosophy. The exhale is the opposite. On our final day, we'll take this last exhale, and we'll leave this plane and either disappear into non-existence or go somewhere else. Who knows? That's the great adventure of life will inform us of that when the time has come. But the yogis recognize this, and with every exhale, especially when they are in their practice of pranayama, when they're in their breathing practices, they attempt to feel that meaning, that every breath out is a small death. And the death, again, isn't negative, but positive, that the consciousness is returning to sort of the unified consciousness. The soul is returning to heaven. And this is aroha, not avaroha, but aroha. And so you want to use your imagination here. Meditation, yogic meditation, breath work, even the postures, they are a psychological and physiological sort of spiritual exercise. And so you want to take the initiative and spend the energy to actually think or imagine as you exhale, there is some form, some expression of death. And that death is leading the soul back to peace or back to unity. And that's going to really sort of add meaning to the exhale, to the Vichaka, and just give substance to the technique itself. And so we're adding a concept to the exhale. The physical experience is the same. And so now we're at this bottom retention. Super difficult. You haven't inhaled in, let's say, 30 seconds, and your lungs are completely empty. So what we're going to do is, during this bottom retention, you really want to commit to your posture. You're going to perk up your spine, tilt your hips forward, straighten your arms, and engage your mudras. And that posturing is going to convince you. It's going to provoke within you confidence. It's like, I have this. I can hold my breath for 1 more millisecond, for 2 more milliseconds. Again, that is Shreya. That's the powerful choice. And in that moment, you're essentially the charioteer, really sort of taking the reins with these crazy horses that have a right to sort of be panicking because there's no oxygen coming into the body. But you're embodying your intellect and your mind, taking control of the reins. And in that, the rider, which represents the soul or Atman, is sort of permitted this enjoyable ride, despite the fact that the horses and the body is sort of responding in a crazy way. And so you're going to exhale, hold your breath, really boost up your posture. And if you really feel like going for it, pull the belly in as well. Okay? All of this is underneath the same count. So inhale, normal, count. Hold your breath, normal, count. Exhale, think about the soul leaving to sort of heaven. Think about consciousness ascending into some other space. Hold the breath with nothing in your lungs, strong posture, and pull the belly in. The belly pulling in is called Uddiyana Bandha. It should be familiar to those that practice yoga poses. Cool, so last little thing. As beautiful as the philosophies are, I think what really sort of stabilizes us and gives us faith that what we're doing is okay is actually the biology. And so I just want to tell you what's going on, while you're holding your breath for longer and longer periods of time, and for longer and longer periods of time. The first thing is that CO2 is building. Carbon dioxide is building. And so carbon dioxide is acidic. So as CO2 builds in your body, you start to feel this burning and this heat. So that's just CO2 levels increasing in the tissues, which is fine. At a certain point, the CO2 levels cross a threshold and your body starts to recognize it as dangerous. At that point, blood starts to get funneled up into your head. So if you start to feel lightheadedness or a heightened sense of presence, you want to appreciate that's because your body's natural response to the situation, it's protecting itself, the brain especially, is pumping blood, oxygen, up into the skull and into the brain to protect the brain versus all of the other organs. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily make it safe. What happens as CO2 levels build to an unnatural level, not necessarily dangerous, but unnatural, is something called the Bohr effect. So inside every red blood cell, inside every little bit of hemoglobin, there is a reserve of oxygen, being saved for such a situation. Once you start breathing normally, I hope you've all felt that there's this sort of rush of euphoria. The breath seems to expand and deflate on its own. There's this sense of tingling, buzzing aliveness. Once you start breathing normally and the oxygen levels sort of return to normal, the Bohr effect initiates and your red blood cells start to dump out even more oxygen into the tissues to sort of preserve them against the acidity of carbon dioxide. And in that you are sort of overwhelmed with the pleasure of oxygen-rich blood. And so the last point is, Kumbhaka isn't necessarily meditation, but it is priming our physical bodies, our chariots, to experience deeper levels of meditation by inducing this really powerful physiological response. After we spend time in the breath techniques, you can sort of sit there memorizing and becoming accustomed to this sort of heightened experience of mindfulness. The beauty of the breath work is that mindfulness is oriented into our bodies versus our environments, which leads to a deeper sense of intimacy. So I just want you to think about all that. A couple other things. One person mentioned like headaches. Holding your breath triggers the parasympathetic or the sympathetic nervous system, so it triggers stress, and one consequence of that stress is that the blood vessels constrict, which boosts blood pressure. So you might have headaches. I haven't heard of people having headaches, but this one student did. If they are persistent, if they last like longer than anything that's sort of worrisome, I would hold your breath for a little less. Reduce your count so that the stress of the technique isn't so blaring. But that's more than likely why there might be some headaches. The blood vessels constrict and you're spending 10, 15 minutes with this constriction. You're in this stress state, and that might affect the way blood is moving in the skull. So just reduce the intensity of the technique, reduce the count. And that's the beauty of this. You can push it as far as you want, but you can also make it as gentle and as passive as you want as well. Groovy, cool. So let's get into this and experience that acidity. That acidity to yogis is called tapas. One of their virtues is tapasya, meaning those that can tolerate extreme acidity, extreme physical exhaustion, have a deeper relationship with Atman, with their soul, because they are forced to rely upon something that is non-physical. For us to control our bodies in this way, we are relying upon something within us and overcoming the impulses of our body, which is a powerful move for any individual, especially animals, right? Cool. All right. So strong seated position. Tall spine, wrist rests on knees. Straighten those arms, spread your fingers wide. Shoulder blades drag down, shut your jaw. And just start to breathe into the belly. And so you're not segmenting the inhale anymore. There's no pause with the breath in, yet you should be able to feel those three spaces. First the belly inflates, then the torso inflates, then the collarbone inflates. And you're just breathing normally, no kumbhaka, you're not holding your breath yet. But you might notice a natural momentary pause, a natural kumbhaka. As you exhale, pull the belly in, keep the spine tall, and feel these three segments of the torso, the abdomen, the actual chest, and then the collarbone region, deflate simultaneously. Now, as you breathe in, appreciate that Sanskrit concept. Avaroha. My consciousness is descending into my body as I breathe in. The nutrition of the air supports my aliveness. And as you exhale, the opposite is true. Conceptually, my consciousness ascends back into heaven, back into what is beyond the physical. And as whatever I am leans into that direction, I am awarded a sense of peace. Now start to find your baseline. Count the inhale. How long does that take? And let's get into Kumbhaka. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. So be patient here. A huge part of all meditative styles is patience. Hold stillness. Try to breathe a little bit slower. Attempt to tolerate the acidity. Let it come, let it go on its own. The inhale and the top retention are normal. Nothing to do but count and feel. When you exhale, keep the spine tall, pull the belly in. Think about aroha. Think about consciousness lifting. Think about the soul rising. The bottom retention, when your lungs are empty, commit to your posture. Think about rigidity, strength, and courage inside the tissues. Pull the belly into the spine as best you can. And let the acidity build. Allow yourself to suffocate. Sweating is a great sign. Trembling is a great sign. Your senses are the horses, and your sense of touch specifically is being asked to move through fire. That fire is carbon dioxide in your body. The evidence of your consciousness is your control over the horses and the chariot. Despite what I feel, I will stay loyal to the technique to prove my sentience, to prove my agency and my authority. Relax your face, relax your body. So while you're going through this crucible, appreciate all that's happening is acidity is building in the blood. You're not taking in as much oxygen. Because of that, the hemoglobin in your blood is releasing reserves of oxygen. So you're okay. Blood is simultaneously being funneled up into the skull to protect the brain, a very sensitive and necessary organ, from the decrease in oxygen within the bloodstream. And so your body is managing itself to a degree. But the control over your organism, the willingness to push into this space, is carving out a space for you to forge a deeper relationship to something deeper. So let's do one more round. No more counting. Inhale as slowly as you possibly can. Hold your breath for as long as you possibly can. Exhale as slowly as you possibly can. And again, hold your breath for as long as you possibly can. After that, deep breaths in, deep breaths out. Attempt to collect as much CO2 as you can. Attempt to break a sweat. Attempt to force a tremble. See where that takes you. Once you're breathing normally, hold perfect stillness and just pay attention to yourself. Feel your body. And so these techniques prime us for meditation. Prime us for perfect mindfulness, objective awareness. And so now that you're breathing normally, relax. Feel your body. Consider the world. Consider the mysteries of it all. Consider the fact that you're here and then you're gone. That life is impermanent, yet infinite. Bring your hands to heart center. Relax your shoulder blades down the spine. And so let's dissect the chariot metaphor one last time. You have sensory organs, you have a body, and you have a mind. The great premise of yogic meditation is that the journey of life is internal. We have to disassociate from our bodies, disassociate from our reputation, disassociate from our identity, and slowly discover something deeper than all of those things. Once we discover that thing and build a relationship to it, reality organizes. We can make the better choice more consistently. And so feel that your body is external to you. Feel that your breath is operating outside of you, that your mind is playing out in front of you. And that while there is this disconnect, it doesn't take away from the beauty and wonder of it. In fact, it heightens it. If you can sense in some vague way that you are within your body, beyond your thought process, and inside the world, that space is called Atman. That space is the soul. And from that space, we can recognize Brahman. We can recognize reality as one thing. In that, there is a greater sense of connection. In that, there is a greater capacity to have faith that it's all good. Couple breaths. Again, test your consciousness. Increase sincerity. Thumb knuckles to third eye center. Again, technique. The way in which we can forge a relationship to this space, this critical point, is through focus and sensitivity. Kumbhaka, breath retention, helps us build both. But it's really about focus and sensitivity. So feel your thumbs touching the skin of your forehead, so much so that other parts of the body blur out. And now within the privacy of your inner voice, your inner space, just acknowledge yourself. The traditional acknowledgement, namaste. I see you. With an exhale, release your wrists to your knees, random fingers to each thumbs. Again, designing the chariot, proving in a minuscule way that you are sentient. And with your next inhale, open your eyes, look into the space in front of you, and attempt to see it as one thing. It's all life. Slow down the breath.